Hi again. Sometimes protest, self-expression, and interesting complex use of language can be combined. I think this is the case with Claudia Rankine's writing. Claudia Rankine was born in 1963 and is a poet and playwright. She really broke out as one of the best known contemporary poets with a book length poem called Citizen, made up of smaller units, which is a kind of collage of different texts that all have to do with the place African Americans have in the United States. Since it was published around the same time, it was identified with the Black Lives Matter protest, anti-racist protest movement. Black Lives Matter activism, at least at first, concentrated on the way black people in the US are more likely to be victims of violence, especially police violence. In addition, the people committing crimes against them are less likely to be punished. Much of the racism against black people is framed as fear of black men. Americans, including or even especially police people sometimes, police officers sometimes, often feel that black men are likely to hurt them. This fear is utilized to justify their own violence. So I'm afraid of that person, so I can hurt them. You can see this idea illustrated in a clip from a TV show called Dear White People that I'm going to link below. It starts with an argument in a party between two college kids, a white kid and a black kid, who's named Reggie. Someone calls security, and the security guards assume that Reggie, the black kid, is the aggressor and invader of that house. They see him as a threat. I think you can see that the security guard is not just asserting his authority. If you watch the clip, you see how the security guard himself seems to be really afraid before he pulls out a gun. He's really jumpy. Because he's jumpy and afraid of the black guy, the black young man, he pulls out the gun, and that causes real trauma to Reggie, whose turn it is now to be very, very much afraid. But what I think is especially interesting is that the security guard with the deadly weapon is also very frightened of the kid who doesn't have any weapons on him. We know, at least as the audience, we know that. Once the gun is out of the holster and is pointed at Reggie, the scene could have ended much worse. We can imagine it being one of the horrible headlines about violence against black people. The scene doesn't end badly, apart from the trauma, but we definitely see the potential. Number of real deaths before the publication of Citizen, like Trayvon Martin, or after the publication of Citizen, like George Floyd, have reached national and international consciousness and drew the protest of Black Lives Matter activists online and in the streets. But Black Lives Matter and Rankine don't only protest against the extreme cases of unjustified violence against black people, but also the much more everyday occurrences of harassment and discrimination. As you'll see in the poem that we'll read together. Rankine's Citizen is a complex book where every poem is related to the other poems. It protests the worst, most dangerous racism in the US, but also smaller incidents those that do not lead to death or injury but contribute to the hostile environment in which African Americans often find themselves. We will only look at one poem, paying special attention to how it functions as protest. I'll read all of the poem, but I won't comment on each and every section. The end, I will try to give a kind of overall look, at least at the conclusion. On the train, the woman standing makes you understand there are no seats available. If there were seats, she would sit, but she doesn't sit. And in fact, there is one. But the speaker sees a seat, creates tension between reality and how the woman behaves. But the speaker, or the you here, sees a seat, creating tension between reality and how the woman behaves, makes us maybe suspicious of the woman's behavior. Is the woman getting off at the next stop? Right then, it would make sense not to sit down if you're just traveling for one stop. No, she would rather stand all the way to Union Station. No, she's standing for a long time. It creates questions. Why would she not sit if there's a seat available? We can guess from the context of the book that it probably has to do with racial dynamics, with race in America. The space next to the man is the pause in a conversation you are suddenly rushing to fill. You step quickly over the woman's fear, a fear she shares. You let her have it. Notice the seat that is empty is next to a man. We don't know his race, but we can guess from the context of the book and the poem that he's black. That's why the woman does not want to sit next to him. For the speaker, this empty seat is embarrassing. It's extremely uncomfortable. It's like a pause in the conversation. How do we know this? She compares it to a pause in the conversation, something that's usually uncomfortable. We know it's uncomfortable because she is in a hurry to fill it up, to sit down and stop this gap in the conversation. She's in a rush to sit down to cure the disquieting situation of a woman refusing to sit next to a black man. The you of the poem, which I think we can associate closely with the speaker, though you could interpret the you as someone different, steps over the woman to sit down, but it is described as stepping over the fear. Not wanting to sit by the black man is based, or at least justified, by fear, not necessarily by something like hatred or disgust or like racism, capital R. There is a kind of fear that prevents her from being close to him. Maybe she's afraid he's going to pickpocket her. Maybe she's afraid she's going to touch her. It's not really clear. But this idea of fear connects to the issue of violence against black people and black men specifically that I discussed earlier. That their perceived danger justifies the violence against them, or in this case, justifies impoliteness or rejection. Indeed, this is a fear she shares. She shares it with a large portion of American society, and also she shares it with anyone who's looking at her, like sharing your feeling. She shows that she has fear. You can see the fear on her. Probably the black man also noticed how she is afraid of him, how she will not sit by him. And the last sentence here, you let her have it, like you let her have her fear, stay standing afraid, and also you let her have it is to let somebody have it is to scold them and tell them that they are wrong. So maybe by sitting down, she tells is sitting down is a way to show that the woman standing up is wrong in doing so. Reading on. The man doesn't acknowledge you as you sit down because the man knows more about the unoccupied seat than you do. For him, you imagine, it is more like breath than wonder. He has had to think about it so much you wouldn't call it thought. The man is familiar with being feared and rejected. He has been so aware of it that he doesn't need to think or speak about it anymore. When another passenger leaves his seat and the standing woman sits, you glance over at the man. He's gazing out the window into what looks like darkness. As I said, his race is not actually depicted here, but perhaps the darkness in the reflection is in the window suggests that this is a black man as well, beyond just knowing the context in the book Citizen. More likely, the reflection in the window suggests the darkness of the interaction within the train. There's something melancholy, sad, dangerous about the way the standing woman was behaving. You sit next to the man on the train, bus, in the plane, waiting room, anywhere he could be forsaken. You put your body there in proximity to, adjacent to, alongside, within. There's a sense that this shifts momentarily from the train to other situations where people sit together to show that they are, that this being forsaken, that this being rejected is something that recurs again and again. It's a recurring incident. It's not a once in a lifetime occurrence. It's something that for this man is something he experienced again and again during his lifetime, and that a lot of other men like him suffer the same treatment. Part of why this protest, part of why this is protest and not just an interesting anecdote, is that Rankin insists that this is something that recurs. You don't speak unless you are spoken to, and your body speaks to the space you feel, and you keep trying to feel it, except the space belongs to to the body of the man next to you, not to you. Where he goes, the space follows him. If the man left his seat before Union Station, you would simply be a person in a seat on the train. You would cease to struggle against the unoccupied seat why the space won't lose its meaning. The significance of the used decision to sit in that particular seat to make sure that the man is not isolated. If he leaves, it's not significant anymore. You imagine if the man spoke to you, he would say, "It's okay, I'm okay. You don't need to sit here. You don't need to sit," and you sit and look past him into the darkness the train is moving through, a tunnel. All the while, the darkness allows you to look at him because it's dark out the window, because it's a subway. The window is like a mirror, but darkness can also function, as I said, to represent dark skin. Perhaps the dark skin is what connects the you in the poem with the man, or the narrator, the you and the man together, that they look at the same reflection and see darkness. Does he feel you looking at him? You suspect so. What does suspicion mean? What does suspicion do? Rankin takes a simple phrase like "you suspect so," you think that he's probably has probably noticed you, and opens it up to a bigger question. And she asks, "What is suspicion? What does suspicion do?" And the story in the poem, this isolation of this man, unless somebody frees him from that isolation is the story. Suspicion creates hate and isolation. The soft gray green of your cotton coat touches the sleeve of him. You are shoulder to shoulder through standing. You could feel shadowed. You sit to repair who. You erase that thought, and it might be too late for that. It might forever be too late or too early. The train moves too fast for your eyes to adjust to anything beyond the man, the window, the tiled tunnel, its slick darkness. Occasionally, a white light flickers by like a displaced sound. From across the aisle, track from across the aisle, tracks room harbor world. A woman asks a man in the rows ahead if he would mind switching seats. She wishes to sit with her daughter or son. You hear, but you don't hear. You can't see. This will be the inspiration for the next and final lines. People asking to sit together with their families. It's a very common occurrence, but it feels far away, like something that's really alien, but it's going to give the inspiration to the final lines. It's then the man next to you turns to you, and as if from inside your own head, you agree that if anyone asks you to move, you'll tell them we are traveling as a family. This poem that begins with the man being isolated probably because of his race ends with solidarity. They agree without words that they are like family. Instead of sitting next to each other because one of them was rejected, they are sitting next to each other because they are part of the same family. They want to be together. That's one reason why I would imagine that the you here is also a black person, probably a black woman. So this poem does not only protest racism and points out racism and the causes of racism and maybe the effects of racism, but offers a partial temporary solution of mutual help